Rain hits dry ground and the smell rises before the first drop even reaches you. You know it. Everyone knows it. That warm mineral scent that lifts off a garden after weeks without water. By the time this ends, you will understand why that single breath does more for your tired body than 7 nights of lying still ever could, and why the people who wait for that rain carry a little less weight in their shoulders than the rest of us. Picture the last dry week you lived through. Not a drought in some far country, the one in your own yard, the soil going pale, the leaves losing their shine, you watering in the evening and it never quite being enough. And then one afternoon the light changes, the air turns heavy, a cooler breath moves through the garden, and the first drops land on ground so dry it cannot even soak them in yet, so they sit there for a second, dark coins on gray dust, before the earth remembers how to drink. Something happens in your chest in that moment. You have felt it. You just never had a name for it. Your breathing slows without you deciding to slow it. Your shoulders drop half an inch. Whatever you were carrying into the garden loosens its grip for a few seconds. And here is the strange part, the part that will bother you a little until we get to the end. That few seconds of standing in the first rain leaves you more rested than the whole quiet week you spent trying to recover indoors. We have this idea that rest is doing nothing, that if we are tired enough, the answer is to lie down longer, sleep more, ask less of ourselves. And sometimes that is true, but most of us know the other feeling too. The week where you slept plenty and woke up just as hollow. The Sunday you spent horizontal and stood up feeling worse. Rest that does not restore. Time off that does not touch the tiredness underneath. There is a reason for that. And the reason is standing out in your garden right now, waiting for the sky to change. Because the body was never built to be reset by stillness alone. It was built to be reset by contact, by weather, by the particular chemistry of wet earth after a dry spell, which is not a poetic idea. It is a real thing with a real name that your nose has known since before you could speak. Stay with me, because I am going to make a promise I intend to keep. By the end of this, you will know exactly what your body does in the first minute of that rain. You will know why a dry week wears you down in a way you never connected to yourself. And you will understand why the calmest people you know, the ones who seem to age slower and worry less, are so often the ones who still stop what they are doing when the first drops come. But first we have to talk about the week that came before, the dry one. The one that quietly emptied you out while you thought nothing was happening. Because you cannot understand what the rain gives back until you understand what the drought took, and it took more than you noticed. There is a woman I think about when it rains like this. She kept a garden into her 80s, and she had a habit that used to make her family laugh. When the sky turned, she would go outside, not to bring the washing in, not to cover anything. She would just stand at the edge of the beds and wait. And when the rain came, she would close her eyes and breathe it in like she was drinking. Her granddaughter asked her once why she did that. And she gave an answer that took years to make sense, an answer we will come back to at the very end when you are ready to hear it. For now, hold on to the image of her standing there. Because before the rain, there was the dry week. And the dry week does something to you that no one warns you about. Slow down here, because this is the part everyone skips. A dry week in the garden looks like nothing is wrong. The plants are still standing. Nothing has died. From the kitchen window, it all looks fine. And that is exactly why it wears you down without a single alarm going off. Drought is not drama. Drought is subtraction. Every day a little less moisture in the soil. Every day the roots reaching a little further for a little less. The plant is not dying, it is economizing. It closes the tiny pores on its leaves to stop losing water. It slows its own growth to survive. It stops making anything new and spends everything it has just holding on. And if you look closely, really closely, at a garden in a dry spell, you are looking at a mirror of a certain kind of week in a human life. You know the week I mean. Nothing collapses. You get up, you do the things, you answer the messages, you keep the plates spinning. Nobody would look at you and say something is wrong. But underneath, you are economizing. You are closing your own pores. You stop making anything new, no new ideas, no new plans, no reaching toward anything, because everything you have is going into just staying upright. That is a dry week in a body. And here is what almost no one tells you about it. You can sleep straight through the middle of it, and it will not lift. That is the thing that confuses people. They feel worn thin, so they do the sensible thing, they rest. They cancel plans, they lie down. And a week later, the tiredness is still sitting there like a stone in a dry riverbed. Because the tiredness of a dry spell is not the kind that sleep fixes. It is a tiredness of not being touched by anything living, of going days without your feet on grass, without cold air in your lungs, without the small shock of weather on your skin. The body reads that absence as a slow drought of its own. Think of the last time you took time off and it did not work. You had the days, you had the rest, and you came back to your own life feeling like you had never left it. That is not a failure of willpower. That is a garden being watered from a can when what it needed was rain. The can keeps things alive. Only the rain brings them back. Here is a number worth sitting with. Researchers who study how people recover from stress keep finding the same thing. It is not the amount of rest that predicts whether you feel restored. It is the quality of the break, and specifically whether it involved being outdoors, moving gently, and paying attention to something outside your own head. In other words, the body does not recover by doing less. It recovers by doing something different, something rooted in the physical world, and a dry week indoors gives it none of that. So the dry week empties two things at once. It empties the soil and it empties you. And because neither one looks like an emergency, you let it go on longer than you should. You tell yourself you will feel better once you have caught up on rest. But rest is not the missing ingredient. The missing ingredient is contact with something alive and changing, and there is very little of that in a house with the blinds half drawn. And then, if you are lucky, the pressure shifts. Somewhere far off, the weather turns. You do not know it yet, standing at your kitchen sink. But the thing that is about to undo a whole tired week in the space of one breath is already on its way. And what carries it to you first is not the water. It is a smell. A smell so old that your body will recognize it before your mind even knows what it means. But before we get to the smell, there is something the garden does during the dry week that we could all stand to learn, and it is the quiet opposite of panic. Change the pace with me here, and picture an old gardener in the middle of a long dry spell. The beds are pale, the soil has cracked into little plates. Anyone walking past would say the garden is in trouble, and the gardener stands at the edge of it in the evening, hose in hand, and does not look worried. Gives each plant a little water enough to hold, looks up at the sky, reads it, and goes back inside. No panic, no despair. Just a steady, patient tending through the thin days and a quiet certainty that the rain will come back because it always has. That calm is not naivety. It is the opposite. It is the deepest kind of knowing, the kind you can only earn by living through many droughts and watching every single one of them end. The young gardener panics in a dry week, waters too much, frets over every drooping leaf, treats the drought like an emergency that will never lift. The old gardener has seen 40 of them break. So they hold the garden through the thin time without falling apart, because they know something the anxious among us keep forgetting. The dry spell is not the whole story, it is a chapter, and it is not the last one. Here is where this touches your own tired week directly. Most of the suffering in a hard stretch is not the stretch itself. It is the fear that it will not end. The dry week is tiring, yes, but what truly wears you down is the quiet voice underneath saying, what if this is just how it is now? What if the tiredness never lifts? What if the color never comes back? That voice turns a passing drought into a permanent verdict, and it is almost always wrong. The garden is the plainest argument against that voice that has ever existed, because the garden does not believe the drought is forever. It cannot. It has water in its roots and a design built entirely around waiting. It closes down, it holds on, it spends nothing it does not have to spend, and it waits. And the waiting is not despair. The waiting is faith made physical, a whole living thing organized around the certainty that the rain will return, and it needs to still be alive when it does. Consider one quiet fact that ought to steady you. A garden in a dry spell is not dying. It is dormant in the places that matter, holding its life low and safe, and it can hold like that far longer than it looks like it can. Plants that appear finished, brown and crisp on top, are often perfectly alive at the root, simply waiting. The visible part looks like an ending. The hidden part knows better, and when the rain comes, the hidden part is what answers. You are more like that than you feel during a hard week. The tired, brittle surface of you is real, but it is not all of you, and it is not the part that decides whether you come back. Underneath the worn-out surface there is a root system, years deep, that has survived every dry season you have ever lived through, and it is still there, holding, waiting, ready to answer the first real rain. You have come back before. You have watched your own color return more times than you can count. The surface forgets that. The root remembers. So when a dry spell has you convinced that this is permanent, borrow the old gardener's calm. Tend yourself steadily through the thin days. Give yourself enough to hold. And do not believe the voice that says the rain is not coming, because you are a living thing, and living things are built around the certainty that it will. And when it does, the first thing to reach you will not be the water. It will be a smell so old your body will know it before your mind does. Here is a question. Why can you smell rain coming before you feel it? Not everyone stops to wonder about that, but you have done it your whole life. You walk out, you lift your head, and you say, "It is going to rain." And you are usually right. How does a nose know that? The answer is one of the quietest miracles in your whole garden, and it has a name most people have never heard. The smell is called petrichor, and the thing that makes it is even stranger. When the soil goes dry, certain tiny living things in it, bacteria that have been in earth since long before there were people to walk on it, produce a compound called geosmin. It sits in the dry ground, waiting. And when the first drops of rain strike that dry soil, they throw microscopic droplets up into the air, and those droplets carry the geosmin with them, up into your breathing, into the oldest part of your brain. And here is the part that should give you pause. The human nose is almost unbelievably sensitive to that one smell. You can detect geosmin at a few parts per trillion. You are more sensitive to the smell of wet earth than a shark is to blood in water. Read that again. Of all the things your body could have been tuned to notice, it was tuned with extraordinary precision to notice the smell of rain returning to dry ground. That is not an accident. For almost the whole history of our kind, knowing that water was coming was the difference between a good season and a starving one. The people who caught that scent and understood it, who read the sky and moved toward the rain, those were the people who lived. So the ability was passed down, and down, and down, until it reached you, standing in your ordinary garden, catching the smell of rain on the wind and feeling something stir that you cannot quite explain. That is the something you feel in your chest. It is recognition, older than language, older than memory. Your body is saying, in the only way it can, the drought is ending. And the whole system relaxes a notch because the oldest fear, the fear of the water not coming back, has just been answered. Now here is where it turns practical, and here is where it connects to the tiredness we talked about. When you breathe that smell in, you are not just having a nice moment. You are getting a signal that reaches straight past your thinking mind into the systems that run your body without asking you. Your heart rate, your breathing, the tension in your gut. The part of you that has been braced all through the dry week, braced against a threat you could not even name, gets permission to stand down. And it does. This is why standing in the first rain does something that lying on a sofa cannot. The sofa gives your muscles a rest. The rain gives your nervous system a message. And the nervous system is where the real tiredness lives. You can rest your body all week and never once send the signal that tells the deep machinery it is safe to let go. One breath of wet earth after a dry spell sends that signal in a single second. I want you to hold on to one image before we go further. A child running out into the first summer rain, arms wide, face up, laughing. Nobody teaches a child to do that. Nobody has to. The pull toward the rain is already in them, the same as it is in you, the same as it was in that woman standing at the edge of her garden beds with her eyes closed. We are all built to run toward the water coming back. Most of us just forget, somewhere along the way, that we were ever allowed to. But there is something that happens before the smell even reaches you. Something the drought sets up, quietly, in the days before the sky breaks. And if you have ever felt strangely on edge before a storm without knowing why, this next part is for you. Notice the change in pace here, because the garden is about to hold its breath, and so are you. Before the first drop, before the smell, there is a stillness. You have stood inside it. The birds go quiet in a particular way. The leaves stop their small movement. The whole garden seems to lean forward, waiting. And your own body, if you are paying attention, does the same thing. There is a heaviness, a pressure behind the eyes, a sense that something is coming that has not arrived. That is not your imagination. The air pressure really is dropping as the weather moves in, and your body really does feel it. Some people get it in their joints, some in their heads. Some just feel a restlessness they cannot place, a tightness, a sense of being on the edge of something. For years, people were told this was all in their minds. It is not. The body is an instrument, and it reads the sky whether you consent to it or not. Here is the thing about that pre-rain tension. It is uncomfortable, and most of us have learned to treat any discomfort as a problem to be solved. We reach for the phone. We turn on a screen. We do anything to get out of the strange, charged waiting. And in doing that, we miss the one part of the whole event that our ancestors would never have missed, because for them the waiting was not empty. The waiting was the garden and the sky telling them, "Get ready, relief is coming." There is a rhythm here that we have almost entirely lost. Tension, then release. The build before the break. The garden knows it. The dry soil knows it. Every living thing out there is coiled and waiting, and then the rain comes and everything unclenches at once. That rhythm is written into how bodies are supposed to work. You are not meant to live at one flat level of low-grade tension forever, which is exactly what a life indoors under artificial light tends to give you. You are meant to build and release, the way weather does. Think about it. When did you last let tension build and then feel it truly break? Not numb it, not distract yourself out of it. Actually feel it rise and then feel it go. Most of us cannot remember because we have gotten very good at cutting the tension off before it peaks, which also means we never get the release. We live in a permanent low drought of the nervous system, watered just enough by small distractions to stay alive, never rained on enough to come fully back. The garden does not have that option. The garden has to wait. It stands in the pressure and the stillness with no phone to reach for, no way to skip ahead, and when the break finally comes, it takes the full force of it. And maybe that is part of why time spent among growing things settles people so deeply. Out there, you are pulled back into the old rhythm whether you like it or not. You feel the build. You cannot escape it. And so, for once, you also get the release. So the pressure drops. The garden holds its breath. You feel that restless charge that you have felt 100 times and never understood. And then, at last, the waiting ends. Because the ground is about to do something you have watched your whole life and probably never really seen. It is about to drink. And the way it drinks will tell you something about your own tired body that you will not be able to unlearn. Watch the ground now. Really watch it the way you would watch a face. The first drops on truly dry soil do not sink in. You have seen this. The earth has gone so hard and so tight through the dry week that it cannot receive the water at first. The drops bead up. They roll. They sit on the surface in little dark beads, and the ground seems to reject them. For a moment it looks like the rain is being wasted, running off the top of soil too parched to take it. And then something gives. The surface softens. The first water works its way into the cracks. And once it starts, it accelerates because wet earth draws in more water more easily than dry earth does. The ground goes from refusing the rain to swallowing it, and within minutes soil that looked dead is dark and soft and breathing again. If you push your fingers into it an hour later, it yields. It was a closed fist all week. Now it is an open hand. I want you to sit with how closely that mirrors what happens in a tired body when relief finally comes, because it is almost exact. When you have been braced and depleted for a long stretch, the first bit of real rest does not land either. You know this feeling. You finally get a quiet evening and you cannot enjoy it. You are too wound up to receive it. The rest beads up on the surface and rolls off, and you think, "I am doing the right thing. Why do I not feel better yet?" The answer is the same as the soil. You are still too hard to let it in. The first hour of true rest is not the restful part. It is the softening part. It is the ground learning how to drink again. And most people give up right there, in that first uncomfortable hour, and decide that rest does not work for them, when in fact they simply stood up before the water reached the roots. Here is what patience with that process looks like in a real day. You come in from a hard stretch. You are wired, tight, unable to settle. Instead of forcing it or fleeing it, you do one slow physical thing. You go out and put your hands in the soil. You pull a few weeds. You water something. And for the first 10 minutes you feel nothing, or you feel worse because the ground of you is still refusing the water. And then, somewhere around minute 15, it gives. The surface softens. And the calm you were chasing all week finally finds its way in, not because you tried harder, but because you stayed long enough for the earth of you to open. There is a reason the first minutes feel like nothing. A dry surface actually repels water for a while, the soil grown so hard and tight that it cannot open, and only once the very top layer has softened does the rest begin to drink. Gardeners have a name for the trick that gets past it. They water once lightly, wait and water again, because the first pass is not for soaking, it is only for softening. The second pass is the one that reaches the roots. Your own calm works exactly the same way. The first quiet moment only softens the surface. It is the staying, the second pass, the not giving up in that first hard stretch, that finally reaches down to where the tiredness actually lives. This is the mechanism nobody explains. Calm is not a switch, it is a soaking. It moves at the speed of water into dry ground, which is slow at first and then all at once. And a garden teaches you this in your hands without a single word every time it rains after a dry week. You watch the ground refuse and then receive, and some part of you learns that you are allowed to do the same. That the first hard hour is not failure, it is the ground drinking. And once the ground has drunk, once the soil is dark and soft and full, something happens in the hour that follows that is, in my honest opinion, one of the most underrated hours in a human life. The hour after the rain. Because the garden does not just survive the water, it uses it. And what it does with it, right in front of you, is the closest thing to watching renewal happen in real time that most of us will ever see. Step outside in the hour after the rain, and the whole world has changed its skin. The colors come back first. You notice it before anything else. The greens that had gone dusty and flat through the dry week are suddenly deep and wet and alive. The leaves shine. The bark of the trees goes dark and rich. Everything looks like it has been turned up, saturated, made more itself. And that is not only in your eyes. The plants really have changed. Within an hour of good rain, leaves that were drooping have lifted. Stems that sagged have firmed. The whole garden physically stands taller than it did before the sky broke. There is a stillness in that hour, but it is a completely different stillness from the one before the storm. The pressure is gone. The charge has been spent. What is left is a soft, dripping, breathing quiet, the sound of water finding its way down through leaves to soil, the smell of the whole garden exhaling at once. If you have ever walked out into that hour, you know it does not feel like the world is resting. It feels like the world is coming back to life, quietly and fast. And here is the direct question I want to put to you. When was the last time you felt like that? Not calm exactly. More than calm. Restored, turned back up, made more yourself. For most of us, the honest answer is that it has been a while, and that when it did happen, we were almost certainly outside, and something almost certainly had just shifted in the weather or the light or the season. We forget that we are subject to the same hour the garden is. We think renewal is something we have to manufacture. The garden shows us it is something we can be given if we are standing in the right place when the rain comes. Here is the part that ties back to where we started. A week of doing nothing indoors cannot give you this hour because this hour is not the absence of effort. It is the presence of something alive using what it was given. The garden did not rest its way back to life. It drank and then it worked quietly, turning water into height and color and new growth. That is renewal. And your body wants the same thing. Not more nothing. A soaking and then a slow using of it. Let me give you one small scene to carry, because it says this better than any explanation. A man loses his wife of 50 years. In the first weeks he can barely move through the house. And then one morning, without quite knowing why, he goes out into her garden after a night of rain and he stands in it. The roses are heavy with water. The whole place is dripping and green and impossibly alive. And for the first time in a month he feels something in him lift, just slightly, just enough. He does not decide to feel better. The wet garden simply reaches into him at a level his grief could not block and hands him a small, undeniable fact. Life is still coming back, even now, even here. He goes out to that garden every morning after that, especially when it has rained, and slowly, over seasons, it puts him back together, not by making him rest, by pouring something into him that the house never could. I think this is why so many people who go through something hard find their way, almost without deciding to, out into a garden. Not to work it particularly, just to be in it, especially right after rain. Some part of them knows that this is where renewal is visible, where you can stand inside proof that being emptied out is not the end of the story, that the ground refuses the water and then receives it, and then, in the hour after, uses it to become more than it was. You cannot get that proof from a screen. You can only get it by standing in the wet garden while it happens around you. And that woman, the one who stood at the edge of her beds with her eyes closed, this hour was the one she was waiting for. Not the storm, the after. She knew something about that hour that most people spend a whole life not learning, and we are almost ready to say it plainly. But first we have to settle the question that has been hanging over this whole thing from the start, the one that probably brought you here. If standing in the rain does all of this, then what exactly was the week of rest failing to do? Why did all that sleep leave you empty? The answer is not what most people think, and once you see it, you will not be able to unsee it in your own life. Here is the thing we have been circling, said as plainly as I can say it. Rest and renewal are not the same, and we have spent a lifetime confusing them. Rest is the removal of demand. It is stopping, lying down, doing less. And it matters, a body that never stops breaks, but rest on its own is a subtraction. It takes the load off. What it does not do, what it cannot do, is put anything back. And a dry week does not only load you up, it empties you out. It drains something. And you cannot refill an empty thing by simply setting it down more gently. You have to pour something into it. That is the difference the garden makes visible. When it rains after a drought, two separate things happen, and we tend to only notice one. The first is that the stress stops. The pressure drops, the plant unclenches, the demand of survival eases. That is the rest part. But the second thing is the one that changes everything. Water actually enters. Something is added. The plant does not just stop losing, it starts gaining. And it is the gaining, not the stopping, that makes it stand taller in the hour after. Most human rest is only the first half. You stop. You remove the demand. You lie down and let the pressure off. And that is genuinely good and genuinely necessary, and it is also only half of what you needed, which is why you can do it for a whole week and still feel hollow. You subtracted the stress, but you never added anything back. You let the rain stop falling on you, but you also stayed inside where no rain could reach. You got the pause without the pour. So what is the pour for a person? It is contact. It is the smell of wet earth reaching the old part of your brain. It is cold air in your lungs and the give of soft ground under your hands and the shock of weather on your skin and the sight of color coming back into a living thing right in front of you. It is the small physical facts of the world reaching in and touching the systems that no amount of lying still can reach. That is what fills the empty place, not more absence, presence. The presence of something alive and changing, met with your actual body, out in the actual weather. This is why the advice to just rest more so often fails the people who need it most. They take the weak, they do the nothing, and they come back to their lives having subtracted the demand but added nothing, standing in the same drought they left, wondering what is wrong with them. Nothing is wrong with them. They were handed half a remedy and told it was the whole thing. And here is the quiet, almost unfair truth of it. The full remedy is mostly free, and it is mostly outside, and it shows up on its own schedule, usually when the sky decides to break. The people who feel most restored are rarely the ones who rested the hardest. They are the ones who were outside enough, close enough to growing things, to catch the pour when it came, who stood in the first rain instead of watching it through the glass, who let the drought end on their own skin. So the next time a dry stretch has worn you thin, and every instinct says lie down and wait it out indoors, remember the soil that refused the water and then drank it. Remember that stopping is only half, and then do the other half. Go out. Get close to something alive. Be there when the rain comes, because there are people who live their whole lives by that second half, and there is something about them you have probably already noticed and never quite explained. Think of someone you know who seems strangely unhurried by age. Someone in their 70s or 80s who carries less fear than people half their years. There is a good chance that person spends real time outdoors, close to the ground, subject to the weather. And there is an even better chance that when the sky turns, they stop what they are doing and pay attention to it. You can spot these people. They are the ones who comment on the light, who know which way the wind has shifted, who will interrupt a conversation to say, that is rain coming, and be right. To a certain kind of busy person, this looks like a lack of urgency, even a kind of simplicity. It is the opposite. It is a depth of attention that most of us traded away for the ability to get more done, and the trade did not go in our favor. Because here is what living by the weather does to a person over decades. It keeps returning them to the old rhythm, the build and the break, the drought and the rain, the emptying and the pour. Again and again, season after season, they are pulled out of their own heads and set back down into the physical world at the exact moments it changes. They do not have to schedule renewal. The sky brings it to them, and they have kept the habit of being there to receive it. So they are watered, over and over, in a way that a life lived entirely indoors simply is not. And it shows, not in some mystical way, in ordinary, visible ways, steadier moods, deeper sleep, because a body that has been out in real weather sleeps differently than one that has been under a ceiling all day. Less of the low-grade dread that follows people who never let their tension peak and break. A kind of settledness that money cannot buy and that no amount of indoor rest produces, because it is not made of rest. It is made of thousands of small pores, thousands of times standing in the changing weather and letting it reach them. Here is a small paradox to sit with. These are often the people who did the least resting, in the way we usually mean it. They worked their gardens into old age. They were out in the cold and the heat and the wet. They did not spend their later years being careful and horizontal. And they ended up more restored than the people who did, because they were getting the second half of the remedy every single week, out in the weather, while the careful ones were inside subtracting demand and wondering why the tiredness never lifted. There is a study worth knowing about here, because it puts numbers on something the old gardeners knew in their bones. When researchers looked at people who spend regular time in green outdoor spaces, they found lower levels of the stress hormones that grind a body down over years, lower blood pressure, and a steadier heart. And the effect was strongest not in the people who exercised hardest outside, but in the ones who simply spent unhurried time there, present, paying attention, letting the place reach them. The garden was not working them like a gym. It was watering them like a bed of soil. And the returns compounded quietly, year over year, into bodies that carried the decades better than the ones kept indoors and careful. That is the whole secret hiding inside these unhurried people. Not one grand act. Thousands of small soakings, most of them free, most of them outdoors, most of them arriving with the weather they never stopped paying attention to. You do not have to become a farmer to have this. You do not have to move to the country or overhaul your life. You have to do one small stubborn thing. When the sky turns, go toward it instead of away from it. Keep a patch of ground, however small, that pulls you outside. Let yourself get caught in the first rain now, and then instead of hurrying under cover, build the habit of being present when the weather breaks, because that habit, repeated over years, is quietly one of the most restorative things a human being can do, and almost no one is doing it. Which brings us at last back to a woman standing at the edge of her garden beds with her eyes closed, breathing in the first rain like she was drinking it. Because her granddaughter did finally get an answer to why she did that. And it turns out to be the whole thing, said in one sentence by someone who had understood it for 60 years. Rain hits dry ground and the smell rises before the first drop reaches you. We started there, and we end there, because that single breath has turned out to hold almost everything worth saying. The woman stood at the edge of her beds every time the sky broke, eyes closed, face lifted, breathing the wet earth in like water. And when her granddaughter finally asked her why, expecting some small answer about liking the smell, the old woman thought about it and said something the girl carried for the rest of her life. She said, "I stand in the rain because it is the only thing that gives back more than the week took. Everything else asks something of me. The rain just fills me up and asks for nothing. So I do not miss it when it comes. I do not miss it when it comes." Say that to yourself the next time a dry week has worn you down to the surface, and every instinct tells you to lie down indoors and wait to feel human again. Remember that rest is only half of what you need. That stopping subtracts the demand but adds nothing back. That the ground refuses the water and then drinks it and then, in the hour after, stands taller than before. And that the pour, the part that actually fills you, is out there, on its own schedule, arriving with the weather, free to anyone still willing to stand in it. The dry week will keep coming. That is not something we get to fix. There will always be stretches that quietly empty you out while nothing appears to be wrong. But the rain keeps coming too. And the difference between the people who are worn down by the years and the people who are somehow softened by them is not who had fewer dry weeks. Everyone gets the drought. The difference is who went outside when the sky finally turned and who watched it through the glass. So keep your patch of ground. Learn the smell of rain on the wind, the one your body has known since before you were born. Feel the pressure build and let it break instead of running from it. And when the first drops come down on soil too dry to take them, go and stand in it. Close your eyes. Lift your face. Let the oldest part of you recognize what it has always recognized, that the water has come back, that the drought is ending, that you are being given something for nothing. Because a week of rest can leave you exactly as empty as you began. But 1 minute in the first rain, breathing the wet earth, standing where the weather can reach you, can hand back what a whole tired season took. The garden has been trying to teach you this your entire life. It teaches it again every time the sky breaks. Do not watch the next one through the window.